Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. Welcome back. Boker Tov. So, last week we spoke about the significance of the land of Israel, a very important topic. And as I told you, that was really an introduction to this week's class, because this week we are going to finish the book of Vayikra with Parsha's Bechukosai, and in that Parsha there is an extensive discussion about Shmittah, which is the sabbatical year. The land is supposed to rest on the seventh year, okay? So in Israel, specifically, during the seventh year, it is forbidden to plant, it's forbidden to harvest, it's forbidden to even have any ownership over any part of your land. If you go to Israel during a Shemitah year, during a sabbatical year, you could walk into fields and you could grab yourself, some fruit, some wheat, some apples, whatever it is, because they are hefker. They are ownerless during that time. It's an incredible, incredible thing. And it's something unique to the land of Israel. We are not obligated to do that here. If anyone walks into your backyard and starts taking fruit and vegetables, call the police, right? But in Israel, it's what you are allowed and supposed to do. It is very clearly a very important mitzvah. So much so that we have in this week's Parsha a very long passage, a very troubling passage, a very tragic passage, which describes what happens when the Jewish people do not act appropriately in the land of Israel. Okay? And it's specific, and it talks about all the terrible things that will happen. You'll be exiled from the land, and it goes on and on. Ultimately, it talks about, we'll read some of it together, but it's really, really, really bad. So much so that the custom in Shul is when the Bal Koreh, when the Torah reader reads this passage, he reads it in a hushed tone because it's uncomfortable. So we read it in a hushed tone for that reason. And so we'll read what happens. And the Torah indicates that the primary reason why this is happening is because of a lack of observance of Shemitah, because they're not taking the sabbatical year seriously. So obviously, you read a passage like that and you recognize Shemitah must be a big deal. This is like critical. This is so, so important. So what I want to do today is two things. One, I want to share with you some of the classic approaches to understanding why this mitzvah is so important. Okay, that's number one. And then number two, what we're going to do is just zoom into one particular curse that's mentioned over here, because I think it's relevant not only to our parsha, but it's going to be relevant to a holiday that many celebrate next week. So with that, let's jump in and read a short paragraph, a very difficult paragraph from this week's Parsha, and then we'll start unpacking this. So, this passage you have in front of me, this quote is from this week's Parsha, and this is God speaking, and God says, if you do not obey me, and do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments and you break my covenants, I in turn will do this to you. I'll wreak misery upon you. You shall eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. Okay, and the Torah actually, if you look in the book in Malachim, this actually happens. This actually happens that the Jewish people, during a certain period of time, they were so they were starving to such a point that there was no food left, and they would eat. They wouldn't kill, but they would eat the corpses of their children, which does not get worse than that, okay? I will destroy your cult places and cut down your incense stands, and I will heap your carcasses upon your lifeless fetishes. I will spurn you. I will lay your cities in ruin and make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not savor your pleasing odors. I will make the land desolate, so your enemies who settle in it shall be astonished by it. Those words, as you can see, are underlined and put in bold. Keep them in mind, we'll come back to that. And you I will scatter among the nations, and I will unsheath the swords against you. Your land shall become a desolation, and your cities a ruin. Then shall the land make up for its Sabbath years, throughout the time that it is desolate, and you are in the land of your enemies. Then shall the land rest and make up for its Sabbath years. Right? So clearly, the main reason you're being exiled is because you didn't keep Shemitah, the sabbatical year. Throughout the time that it is desolate, it shall observe the rest. Right? So while the Jews are in exile, that's when the land will, so to speak, catch up. Okay, fine, we'll have to keep on, we'll see what this means. It shall observe the rest that did not observe in your Sabbath years while you are dwelling upon it. As for those of you who survive, I will cast a faintness into their hearts in the land of their enemies. The sound of a driven leaf shall put them to flight. Okay, pretty harsh words, and this is just a snippet from the passage. It's a very dark passage. But let's, again, address the two things we want to address. We spoke last week about why the land itself is so significant. Today, let's talk about the resting of the land. Shemitah, what it is all about. I'll just mention, by the way, there is one pertinent law of Shemitah that does apply even outside of Israel, and that is loans. Okay, in addition to leaving your land ownerless during the seventh year, if you have a loan and it passes Shemitah, the loan is canceled. The loan is canceled. It's a pretty wild idea. There is, the rabbis about 2,000 years ago recognized that people stopped lending money because they're like, I can't do this. I need to get my money back. And so they created something called a pruzbul, which is a document that you write that, we could talk about practically at other times, but it's a document that kind of circumvents some of the laws of Shmittah. It's a complicated mechanism that allows for the sort of a circumvention, but ultimately allows a person to collect their loans. But that would be the relevant part for us. So basically, there's two main features to Shmittah. One is that the land is not farmed during that time, the land is ownerless, and all loans are canceled, okay? So let's see 4 different approaches in terms of what Shmittah is all about. So says the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. He says like this, he says, furthermore, okay, he gives a couple of reasons behind it, but he says the earth will increase its yield and improve its fertility through the Shmittah. So the Rambam writes a very pragmatic explanation as to why Shmittah is so important. The Jewish people in those days certainly were primarily farmers. In Israel, really, until not that long ago, farming was the prime mover of the Israeli economy, right? So a person could overuse land. This happened actually in the south. As part of why they shifted, to different crops, because they kept on using it over and over again. They were using it too hard. And I don't know enough about farming, but this is an idea in farming. You don't want to go ahead and overdo it. Sometimes the land itself needs to rest. So the Rambam says, you know why God commanded us to do this? So that the land will be able to produce the maximum yield. And if you plant every year, it's going to overdo it. Now, it's a nice reason. It also clearly doesn't capture everything. Meaning God, if the whole reason behind Shmittah was simply so that you'll be a successful farmer, then you wouldn't imagine God exiling you from the land and all these things because of that. There must be more. So let's see some other reasons. So if you look at the next source, this is from the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch literally means the book of education. And I love the backstory to this book. I always share it because it's so fascinating. The backstory to the book is as follows. It was written sometime in the Middle Ages, sometime about 700 or so years ago. I don't remember exactly. We don't know who the author is. It was written anonymously. We do know why he wrote it. He writes in his introduction, my son is bored on Shabbos afternoon. And I read that wow, things don't change, right? My son is bored on Shabbos afternoon. And he doesn't have anything to do. So how am I going to keep him busy? He doesn't play spit and card games and Monopoly. What does he do? He said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book about the mitzvos so that we could study these laws together every Shabbos afternoon. Clearly, his son was a good kid. I don't know if my son would be like, I'll stay with you all Shabbos afternoon, maybe for a few minutes. But that's the rationale behind this book. And it's a lovely book. It's a short book, really. It goes through every single mitzvah, every single commandment. It tells you on each Parsha. In this week's Parsha, we have this commandment. These are the basic rules. And this is a potential reason behind this mitzvah. Interestingly, he is in some ways ahead of his time. He's a big behaviorist, and what that means is that very often his philosophy about mitzvos is that acharei ha'peulot nimshachot halvavot, that after the actions, our hearts are drawn. That sometimes when we do things in a certain way, Judaism is very focused on action. And you say, hey, what about our minds? And his explanation behind that is that it's very hard to shift our mindsets. It's much easier to manipulate our actions. So if we do certain things, then eventually our mind, our heart, so to speak, catches up. Or if there's someone that maybe you don't like so much, and you want to like them. You're a good person. This person drives me crazy, but I want to have a good relationship with them. What's the best thing to do? So some people say, run away. Have nothing to do with them. Okay, that's one option. Another option, what the Sefer Chinuch and behaviorists will tell you is, go do things with them. Go take them out to coffee. Go buy them flowers. Go give and give and give. And in that giving, sometimes it actually shifts our mind, so to speak, catches up to our actions. So that's the Sefer Chinuch's general approach. Okay, but let's see what he has to say about Shmittah. He says like this, it is our duty to fix firmly in our minds that the universe was created by God. Okay, it's very important to recognize that God created the world. As it is stated, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th, on which he created nothing, he declared rest for himself. Now, in order to eliminate the philosophy of the eternity of the world, a view which destroys the foundations of the Torah, so there was a very popular belief, actually which existed until not that long ago, of the eternality of the world, that the world always existed, right? This is pre-Big Bang theory, which talks about some level of some beginning. And there's this notion of the world always existing. If the world always existed, that what's missing? A creator, right? If you always had a world, then you don't need someone to put it into place. Okay, so in order to reject that, this idea which is so critical, we're instructed to measure time, day by day, year by year, counting 6 and resting on the 7th. So in order to never forget about the fact that God rested, that not more than God rested, that God is the creator, we count everything by cycles of 7. We have 6 days of the week. We rest on Shabbos. We say, God, you're in control. We have 6 years, and 7th year we stop. We say, God, you're in control. By abstaining from working, we are saying it's not ours. We are not the creators. You, God, are the creators. There's I don't know if this still is the case, but there's a place called the Rockefeller Plaza in New York, a large area, and there was a public thoroughfare that you could cross through it. But apparently one day a year, they would close it off to the public. Why would they do that? In order to demonstrate, because as long as the public's walking through it, it would indicate that it's owned by the public. By one day a year, by exerting their authority, it demonstrates that they're the ones who own that place, and it's not owned by the public, right? That's the idea of resting on Shabbos. We don't create on Shabbos as a way of saying we are not the creators. One day a week, God, you're the creator. So 6, 6, 6, and 7, and basically 6 days and 7, 6 days and 7, 6 years, and then a 7th year. It's in this way, the principle of creation will never leave our consciousness. This is why God commanded us not just to refrain from agricultural labor, but also to renounce our ownership of the produce of the land during this year. It reminds man that it's not by virtue of his own independent power of the earth, which yields its fruits year by year, but because there is a God who is master over it and over its owner. Okay, that's one idea. Then he continues. Another objective, to cultivate and strengthen man's faith and reliance on God. For he who can relinquish ownership over his land and the land of his fathers every 7 years and accustom his entire family to it will never become obsessed by desire for possession nor suffer from lack of reliance on God. Okay, what he's saying is that if you are forced to not work every 7 years, you end up almost forced to develop a deep belief in God. Let me give you an analogy, okay? Some of you worked, 9 to 7 had 9 to 5, you maybe had a steady paycheck, and some of you worked on commission, maybe owned your own businesses, okay? I'd venture to say, I've never done a study, but I'd venture to say in my interactions, those who get a steady paycheck, typically, I find the people who are their own bosses or are getting commissions, typically, if they're both observant, both believers in God, typically the second category has much stronger faith in God. Because for those of us who get like a steady paycheck, comes the mail, magical, wow, it's there, right? Whereas those who have to hustle to make that paycheck, you recognize how little is in your control. Some days you can work your tail off and nothing happens. Some weeks you do nothing and everything comes together. So that's the idea of Shmittah. By resting every 7 years, you're forced to believe. You're forced to believe in God. In other words, you're almost like, it puts you, again, it's like that behaviorist type of approach where by stopping, I'm like, okay, what's going to fill the void? I'm scared, I'm anxious. I'm going to believe in God, and it's going to instill within us as a people a belief in God. So one, reminder of the fact that God is creator, and B, by abstaining from work, it reminds the person that God is in control and instills within the person that God is in control and really deepens their faith in God because I'm not working, so I'm kind of forced, if I'm going to stay this path of observance, I'm kind of forced to allow, deeper belief to take over me. Okay? That's how the Sefer HaChinuch explains it. The Ibn Ezra explains that the goal of the Shemitah year is that they may learn, and when he says learn, he means Torah. Learn Torah the whole year. In other words, one may say, hey, Shemitah, I take off a year of work. Fantastic. I've been meaning to go to the Bahamas. Or if you're in Israel, I'm meaning to go to, what's it called? What's the islands over there? The Greek island, whatever. I don't know. The islands over there. Where do they go? Where does everyone go over there?
Caribbean?
No. Near Israel, right near Israel.
The Greek islands, like Santorini, those kinds of places.
I don't know.
Cyprus.
There we go. All Israel. That's a cheap, cool vacation in Israel. Cyprus. Thank you. Okay. That's where it's like close by. Everyone goes to Cyprus. That's the vacation. I'm going to take a year off and go vacation, go backpacking. No. The goal of this year is to realign ourselves to our values. The goal of the year is to spend a year immersed in study. Right? Immersed in deepening our connection to God by not being bothered by our work and those stressors, but instead to engage, to fully immerse ourselves into Torah study. That is the importance of the 7th year. Finally, we have Rav Kook. Rav Kook lived about 100 years ago. He was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, or what was not yet Israel, was then called Palestine. It was still under British rule. And he, during his time, farming was the prime industry in Israel. And Israel, the economy of Israel was nowhere close to where it is right now. Israel's economy right now is not doing great because everyone's on Miluim and the war, but it doesn't compare. Right now, it's an established country. Then it was not even a country yet, and things were in a precarious state where people didn't have food. It was not great, and Shemitah was coming up, and basically the farmers turned to Rav Kook and said, we can't do this. We're going to literally starve. And not just us starving, but it's going to cause a ripple effect. The entire Israeli economy is going to crumble. And Rav Kook basically wrote a book about some leniencies that he came up with in order to ensure that they could still keep Shmittah, but do it in a way that the land is not completely, going to be ruined, and the economy will not be completely ruined. It was a big controversy. Anyway, he wrote a beautiful book explaining his leniency, which people still rely on to this day. Although there's a lot of debate. Maybe it was true 100 years ago when everything was falling apart. Can you really rely on it nowadays? Okay, interesting discussion. But in his introduction to the book, he explains the philosophy of why we need Shmittah. Here he says something very interesting. One more piece before we read this. Rav Kook is living during a time of incredible social upheaval. There are anarchists, many, everywhere. There is communism, socialism, taking roots in many places, and of course the leaders of many of the the amount of Jews who were involved in these movements, certainly in the early years until they were all purged, were significant. There were many Jews involved in these movements, and most of his fellow rabbis saw in all these movements heresy and things which were against Judaism, which for the most part, they were very much, opposed to Judaism. Rav Kook has this very broad and expansive and loving worldview where he sees, even in, so to speak, the worst of things, something valuable, something that we could learn from, something we could grow from. When he saw all the young people of his generation, many of the young people of his generation rejecting that of the past, the other rabbis that he was, his colleagues were sitting shiva. They're like, the next generation's leaving. And he said, look, they have a thirst for something more. We're not giving them enough. We need to supply their thirst. We need to give them deeper Torah. We need to give them something more because the Torah that we have in the past wasn't enough, right? You see this very positive worldview. So here too, you'll see he's going to take what we'll call socialism, which certainly, which doesn't seem to does not line up with Judaism on many levels, but he's going to take some elements and incorporate it into his worldview. So let's see what he says. He says, that aggressiveness, which is essential to the working of institutions in the public arena, caused the diminishing of moral sensitivities. The ongoing tension and conflict between the idealistic call to care, kindness and truth, pity and compassion on the one hand, and ruthlessness, coercion, and the pressure of quest for material success, inevitable and essential in daily life, on the other hand, causes, I'm going to explain what this means in a moment, cause the distancing of the divine light from the collective mindset of the nation, a distancing which has the power to lurk with poisonous effect, even in the moral world of each individual. So he's describing over here as follows. If you ever owned your own business or worked, then there is a sense of, you need to be not ruthless, you need to be intense. Sometimes you need to push a little bit, right? There's an energy, there's a drive for success, material success, right? All those things which are necessary for our economy to flourish in our world, and for all these things to flourish, they also have a certain negativity. They get in the way. If I'm trying to build up my business, by definition, I'm trying to build it above you, right? I'm basically, by definition, some level of competition with you. So care, kindness, pity, those things don't really have a place in a business, right? Okay, sometimes you can be flexible, but let's say you own a restaurant and every single person comes and says, I had a bad week, could I get a free meal? You'd be out of business in 2 days, right? I mean, obviously you can't do those things. So you have to put your pity on the side, and you have to put your friendliness on the side to compete, right? So there is, by definition, in a world where a world of open markets, of free markets, etc., where we are trying to be successful, by definition, it causes, as he says, a distancing of the divine light. It gets in the way of all these beautiful sharing, midos, these characteristics of sharing, of equality, of being together, of looking out for others. There's no space for it in our economic model. Okay, so he says, now, the periodic suspension of the rat race, the societal order, can bring a phenomenal boost to the nation. When society is morally and spiritually ordered, raising and perfecting the social order. So he's describing it as follows. He says, yes, we need to be, we need to have competition. Our society is not going to go anywhere without competition. Look in other countries where they don't have competition. It's not good. Competition is what drives our world, and the Torah is fine with that, has no issue with that. But there's a recognition that in that rat race, individually, by organizations, there is a diminishing of our care and concern for others. So every 7 years, basically, we're going over here. We're trying to live a moral life, but by definition, there's all these traits which we need to run our businesses, which kind of take us away from caring about others. So every 7 years, we go, shh, and we say, okay, everything's equal. My loans, they're forgiven. The land, it's everybody's. There is absolute equality, but society will never flourish that way. So after a year, we go right back. And again, we're going to start to veer a little bit off course because that's the natural course of things. And then every 7 years we go back and we try to reset things so that we're all in a place of togetherness and a place of looking out for one another. And so again, it's basically being done in order to ensure that we have a reset of society, almost like the regular society that we're accustomed to over here. And then like every 7 years, we're like a socialist or communist society. Everything is equal. Everything is shared. There is no individual ownership. Everything is kind of equal, but that's not a society will never go anywhere. It's just there for the reset, and then we start building back with our regular model. Okay? So those are a couple of ideas behind Shemitah. There are other ideas. The Ramban speaks about it, representing certain ideas of Olam Haba, of the world to come, and that's why he explains it's so important. But we could start to appreciate that Shemitah is not just a year off, a year to vacation. There are a lot of values here, whether it's the value of reminding ourselves that God is in control, which is fundamental to our entire way of life, whether it's the value of recognizing that God is the creator and in control, right? Both of those are fundamental ideas of our life, giving us an opportunity to study Torah, giving us an opportunity to kind of reset and to be a little bit more together than we are during a normal year. All those reasons are the reasons why Shemitah is so important. And because we do not keep Shemitah, and we did not historically do a good job keeping Shemitah, God says, I'm going to give you some severe punishments. Okay. Part 1. Any questions, comments?
Yeah. Is it only in Israel?
Only in Israel. Shemitah is only in Israel. Not the loan part is true outside of Israel, but the land part is only in Israel. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Okay. I go to 7 Mile, and I see something there that was made in Israel. Can I buy it?
Great question. So in 7 Mile, the answer is yes. This year in general, but during a Shemitah year or right after a Shemitah year, this actually is a huge issue, because of the fact that that people will sometimes, be harvesting these things and not keeping Shemitah, and then these fruit, there are many restrictions. So it's been, I think it was last Shemitah year, maybe 2 years ago or something, 2-3 years ago. So it's been a while, but yeah, next Shemitah year, there's a lot you have to keep in mind when it comes to purchasing things. Trader Joe's, I think, sells like oranges or different some fruit that are made in Israel, and Costco as well. Okay, and so so you could run into some issues. In general, buying fruit from Israel outside of like 7 Mile or maybe Market Maven could be problematic because there's also some tithes that have to be taken. Not so well known because we don't take these tithes, but if you're in Israel, take these tithes. So generally speaking, I know, although it sounds like counterintuitive, I would stay away from buying fruit and vegetables that are from Israel. If you are outside of Israel, if you're in Israel, usually they'll have a sign. We took the proper trumos and maestros, but outside of Israel, if you see something made in Israel, I generally try to stay away from it.
Okay, but now Israel sees this vegetable or fruit is going bad. It's going to die. Nobody's taking it. Is it better to let it rot?
You shouldn't actively go ahead. It's fine to leave it rot. Yeah.
It's fine to
let it rot. It's fine to let it rot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Better than using it and maybe misusing it and not taking care of it properly. Okay. Let's now turn the page. We're going to turn the page, and I want to focus on this curse, which we saw underlined, that God says, I'll make the land desolate, so that your enemies who settle in it shall be astonished by it, okay? It's one of many, many curses, okay? It's under the heading of desolation of the land. It's one of many, many curses, but we'll see there's a particular reason why I want to highlight this curse, okay? So let's see a couple of different approaches. We're going to see 4 different approaches, and I want to really emphasize the last one, but 4 different approaches to what this verse means. So the Ibn Ezra is one of the medieval commentators, okay? He says like this. He says, your enemies will be astonished. What does that mean? It will be so desolate that even your enemies who dwell there will note its desolation. It will be the opposite of the joy of the entire earth. Okay, so basically the way that the Ibn Ezra is understanding what this punishment is all about is that it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, meaning it'll be so broken, the land of Israel, that it'll be so obvious that God is punishing you, and therefore, as opposed to what Jerusalem and Israel is supposed to be, which is a place of pride. People are supposed to look at the land of Israel and say, wow, unbelievable. It's such a special place. People are going to look at this land and say, ridiculous. Like clearly, like it's such an embarrassing place, such a lousy place, and therefore it's going to be embarrassing to us, the Jewish people. Right? So in other words, what he's helping us understand, what I think he's addressing is as follows. If you're not in the land, do you really care that the land is desolate? In other words, God says, I'm going to exile you from the land of Israel, okay, and you're going to be out of the land. Okay, no one's going to be in Israel. There are a few Jews that stayed in Israel. You're not going to be in the land of Israel. And while you're gone, it's going to be desolate. All right, I'm not there. Like, who cares, right? Why is it a big deal? And so the Ibn Ezra is addressing, he's saying what the reason is that it is a big deal is because it's shameful. This is your land. It's Eretz Yisrael. It's the land of the Jewish people, and it looks lousy. People come there like, this is what you lived in? This is your place? What is it? It's a swampland, okay? Okay, and that's therefore they would basically it's part of the punishment because people will, even though you're not there, will associate it with you, and it'll be shameful. That's approach number one. Okay, let's just skip to Rashi. Let's skip to what Rashi says. Rashi says like this: "And your land will be desolate." Okay. You will not soon return to it. Thus your cities will be waste or desolate. They will seem to you like wasteland. For when a person is exiled from his house, from his vineyard, and from his city, but he knows that he is destined to return, it is as though his vineyard and house are not destroyed. Okay, so what is Rashi saying? The way Rashi's understanding this is a little different. He's saying, again, he's also trying to address that question. Why is it such a big deal? Who cares? If I'm not there, if you tell me, I went to vacation last year in Florida, and that place right now doesn't exist anymore. Well, all right, whatever. I don't know. I mean, not the whole Florida. That house, they tore it down. Okay, who cares? I'm not renting space there anymore. It doesn't matter to me, right? So again, the Ibn Ezra said, it does matter because it reflects on you. Rashi says a different approach. He says, it'll be like it's desolate. What does it mean it'll be like it's desolate? What it means is that if you go somewhere and you know you're coming back, okay, I know I'm coming back. It's not so bad. I think about it. I imagine it. I know I'm going to come back to that place. But if I don't think I'm coming back, then it's as if it's destroyed. It doesn't exist to me. It may exist. It may be flourishing. But since I do not anticipate coming back, therefore, it's considered like it's destroyed. So according to Rashi, the reason this is relevant to the people is because it's basically saying your exile is going to last so long that you're going to feel like it's destroyed. Okay, it's going to feel like the land of Israel doesn't exist because to you, it's going to be thousands of years until you return, and therefore it's going to be like nothing. Okay, so let's go on to the third. So basically, it's not literal, but basically it's saying that you're going to despair from coming back to the land of Israel. Let's go to the
So is it like basically, it's what the effect of it is that it will disconnect you from the land of Israel. You will not feel.
You will not feel connected. You'll not feel like you'll
feel
correct.
like it's hopeless, and then
Correct.
forget about it.
Correct.
Move on without the land.
Correct. You'll feel a sense of despair. Exactly. You'll feel like a lack of connection. I'm never coming back. There's no way we're going to come back. We've tried. It's not happening. And therefore, it's going to be despair. So again, according to approach number one, it's all about the shame. Your home, your land is a wasteland. According to the second approach, it's about you not coming back. Okay. The third approach is that of the Ramban. But before I read you this Ramban, I want to share with you a little bit of context. Okay. The Ramban, Nachmanides, lived in the 13th century. 14th century? 13th century? 14th century.
1200s or 1300s?
Okay, one of those. Okay, a long time ago, people. Okay, and he lived in Spain. Okay?
1260 was the debate.
Okay, perfect, fantastic. End of 13th century. Thank you so much, John. Okay, end of the 13th century, and he was the leader of the Jewish people. He is probably, he's when people say famous Jewish leaders, we say like Rambam, Maimonides. Nachmanides, I would argue, is far more influential. In some ways, he actually rescued Rambam from obscurity. The Rambam, Maimonides, I'll give a little history of the Ramban because he's such a fascinating character. The Rambam Maimonides, he wrote a couple of books and ideas which many took issue with. Many took great issue with and saw as heretical. And there were a lot of fights over some of his writings while he was alive, but especially after he died. And to the point that those who were opposed to Maimonides' writings told the Christian authorities and said that what Maimonides is writing is heretical to all people of faith, and they ultimately ended up burning the Rambam's books, okay, in a public square in France, and basically burnt copies of his books. Imagine that. And it was caused by Jews, right? It's caused by Jews who were doing this for, what they thought was the right reason, but obviously this is too much, okay? But the Rambam's views were very questionable, problematic. It didn't seem to jive with some of our traditional ideas. The Ramban, Nachmanides, comes along. He lives a little bit after him, and he goes ahead, and he is like the most respected of leaders during his time. He lives a little bit after the Rambam. He lives kind of the crossroad between Ashkenazi Jewry, Germany, France, etc., and Sephardic Jewry, Morocco, Spain, Egypt, okay? And he is kind of like in the middle of them and kind of bridges both their way of thinking and has influence on both sides, on both communities. One of the things that he does is he spends a lot of time in his writings arguing, but also defending Maimonides. He says, he'll point to certain places where he says, Maimonides is wrong over here, but it's not heretical. Let me tell you why, right? So he's defending the Rambam. He respects the Rambam, He doesn't always agree to the Ramban, but he respects him. Anyway, he lived in Spain, a very nice life, a wonderful life. He was a doctor, a physician, like many of the great leaders were of the time. Respected leader. It was still like the end of the golden age of Spanish Jewry. He lived a comfortable life. Towards the end of his life, when he was 72, okay, which in that day and age was quite old. Now, like 70 is the new 50, right? Right? Yeah. Okay. So it's called. So, but there you go. Okay. But he was, that day and age, he was quite elderly, and the Christians wanted to have a debate between the Jews and the Christians, and this was pushed by a man by the name of Pablo Cristiani, who was actually a Jew who converted to Christianity, an apostate Jew. And the Ramban did not want to get into one of these debates. These debates never end well. But the king promised him, I'll take care of you. You could say whatever you want. Don't worry about it. It's fine. He has the debate, and what happens? Well, yes, he says he won. The Christian records say they won. What else is new? Okay, fine. Bottom line is, the Ramban, the king said, according to the Ramban's version, the king says he won. Okay, I just want to find out. I imagine he did. The Ramban actually went ahead and wrote a copy of the dialogue, and it looks like he won. It sounds like he won. I think he won, but I'm just telling you, the Christian historians will tell you otherwise. Fine. Anyway, after this debate, and maybe after the publishing of his book, the Christian authorities said he was heretical, he has to be killed. Okay, so basically the king allowed him to leave the country, and so he leaves the country at 72, which again, that day and age is like, he's really, really, really considered really old at this time. He has his whole community, his whole life invested into Spain, and he's forced to leave. So he leaves, and where's he going to go? Israel. He decides to go to Israel. Now, Israel at this point it went through numerous different fights and wars. This was during the times of the Crusades, or a little after the Crusades, and Marmaluks and different nations were all fighting over the land of Israel. Every few years, there was another group that came in and decimated the other group, but in doing so, they didn't just kill the people. They razed the whole place. It was an absolute mess. We'll hear about the mess in a moment. The Ramban comes. First, he comes to the port city. I don't remember if it was Jaffa or Tiberia. I think it comes to Tiberia. In Tiberia, there's some Jews living there in Tiberias, and they beg him to stay. And he says, "Nope, I want to go to Jerusalem. I want to go to Yerushalayim." Okay, and he comes to Yerushalayim. Okay, and when he comes there, he basically sees an absolute wasteland. Okay, he writes a letter. So we have an actual recording of his experience because he sends a letter to his son, and in that letter to his son, he says, "The holier the place, the greater the desolation." He says, I've traveled through the land of Israel. The holier the place, the greater desolation. The greatest of the holiest of places, Jerusalem, is the most desolate of all. It's a complete wasteland. He says it's been destroyed by these people and that people, and it's complete wasteland. He says he can't even find a minyan. He says there's 2 people there, two merchants or tailors, I forget, who are living there. He says that's the only people I find. All the Jews have run away because due to all the fighting, they basically were killing them, and it was unsafe to be there. When he gets there, he ultimately, just parenthetically, people want to be next to Ramban. He's a big scholar, so people start coming. He builds a shul. It's called the Ramban Shul. You could see a Ramban Shul in Israel today. It's not the original. The original was destroyed, but he rebuilt. But he built the original one over there, and he basically rebuilt a community in Jerusalem. But again, his starting point is he comes and he writes to his son, it's so heartbreaking, everything is so broken. Okay, so that's a little bit of the context of when he's writing. Now, he writes his commentary on the Bible, on the Chumash, while he's in Israel, or at least does a lot of the editing. It's completed while he's in Israel. So I'm going to assume that he writes his commentary to this passage while he's living in Jerusalem, because he lives there for a couple of years. He doesn't pass away right away. He lives there, I think, for 10 more years. And he finishes his commentary of the Chumash there. Okay? And so again, the verse that we've been discussing is, I will make the land desolate, so your enemies who settle in it shall be astonished by it, right? The land is going to be desolate. And we saw David Ezra saying it's going to be shameful. We saw Rashi say you're going to give up on it. Let's see how the Ramban explains what these words mean. Okay? You see this under the Ramban? Okay, it says the Ramban, when God says here, your enemies will be astonished, it is, the Hebrew is Besura Tova. It is good news concerning all the exiles, that our land will not accept our enemies. Okay? So he says this is not actually a curse. In the long string of curses, it's actually a blessing. What's the blessing? That the land will not accept our enemies. This represents a great proof and promise to us that nowhere can one find a land that is good and expansive, and which was once inhabited, that is now desolate like Eretz Yisrael. For since we left it, it has not accepted any nation or people. All try to settle it, but they do not succeed. So the Ramban says this verse over here, in the middle of this long string of curses, and you just imagine, he's looking out the window. There's ashes and marble, and pillars broken down, and everything's a mess. He says, this is a blessing. I see in this destruction absolute blessing. What's the blessing? That Hashem says, until the Jews live there, I'm not going to allow the land to be rebuilt. I'm going to allow the land to remain of us. They're going to try to plant. They're going to try to farm. It's not going to work because it's your home, Jewish people. It's your home, Am Yisrael. When you come back, all of a sudden, the desert will bloom. All of a sudden, it will flourish. But as long as you're not there, this land is not meant for anyone else. And therefore, it will not flourish. Okay? And if you look, and this is true historically. If you look, Mark Twain writing, when did Mark Twain live? You're all American? I don't know, end of the 19th century? Yeah. He writes his famous trip to Israel, right? His famous trip to Israel is a famous quote, but let's read it because it's beautiful. He writes like this: the desolation is here. This is from his trip to Israel or Palestine. The desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. Okay? If he could say imagination cannot grace, of Mr. Creative himself, again, a desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. Jerusalem is mournful and dreary and lifeless. I will not desire to live here. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Nazareth is forlorn. About the ford of Jordan, where the host of Israel enter the promised land, with songs of rejoicing, one finds only a squalid camp of fantastic Bedouins of the desert. Jericho, the cursed, lies a moldering ruin today, even as Joshua's miracle left it more than 3,000 years ago. Renowned Jerusalem itself, the stateliest name in history, has lost all its ancient grandeur, and it has become a pauper's village. So this is Mark Twain writing this about 100 or so years ago, and now it's just in Israel 2 weeks ago. Yerushalayim, you got to be kidding me! It's magnificent. It's magnificent, and yet it's still not where it needs to be. But the notion of, as long as we have not been there, the land was desolate. And then when the Jewish people came back, all of a sudden it turned. It's something that we saw with our own eyes. Look at any picture of what Tel Aviv was. Look at Petach Tikva. These were swamplands. These were swamplands filled with malaria. I mean, Petach Tikva, which is flourishing, booming. Go try affording a house in Petach Tikva today, right? Or apartment in Petach Tikva. It was a swamp filled with malaria. It was filled with disease. No one wanted to touch it. And the Jewish people came there, and it's flourishing. Go to the Negev, go to the south, and people are planting their trees in the south. Unbelievable, right? And basically this is, says the Ramban, God's promise. God said, as long as you are not there, it will be a wasteland. Says the Ramban when he was there, wasteland. Says Mark Twain, it was a wasteland. When you come back, it'll change. And so in the midst of a curse, I just find this piece, next week is Yom Yerushalayim, and I just think, I always imagine to myself, and I try to imagine to myself, if the Ramban, if Nachmanides were living today, imagine he was kicked out of Spain today, okay? Could happen. And he's living, it comes to Yerushalayim, and he's writing a letter to his son. Like, imagine how radically different that letter would be. He'd say, I heard that 100 years ago this place was a wasteland, but let me tell you, today, all I see is blessing. All I see is abundance. All I see is flourishing. It's unbelievable. We people talk about wanting to see miracles in their lives, and I don't know. I think there's nothing more incredible. We've seen God's hand. This feature of the land of Israel, the flourishing of Israel in Jewish hands, as opposed to the way it was when not in Jewish hands. For me personally, I there's nothing more miraculous, nothing which shows the hand of God more than that. And that is, again, that's one piece we need to appreciate. The other piece is just to appreciate the optimism of the Ramban. Here he is. He was just exiled from the land. He was just exiled from his homeland. He's away from his family, his beloved son. It doesn't seem like his spouse was alive at the time, but he's away from his community. He comes to a wasteland, and he's able to see within that bracha. He's able to see within that blessing. He's able to see goodness. It's something we need to aspire to. We sometimes go through difficult times. That's life. And sometimes, as a people, we go through difficult times. It's tragic. And at the same time, to be able to try to find something positive, try to find the light, that is something that Rabbi Akiva famously did, the Ramban did, and something that we could follow in those footsteps. Have a great day. I will see you all next week. Okay, thank you so much.